My sister smacked my baby at Christmas dinner. She told me I was making too big a deal. Everyone else stayed silent. But then my husband, a military commander, stood up, stared her in the eye, and said, "Leave." She walked out and never returned. I still get chills thinking about it. Last Christmas, my own sister, Vanessa, slapped my 6-month-old baby, Lucas, right across the face. And the worst part? My entire family just sat there, frozen, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But then my husband, David, a man who commands soldiers, slowly rose from his seat. And in that moment, everything changed. Because what I learned in the days that followed wasn't just about one slap, it was about 28 years of being invisible in my own family, finally coming to a head. The Sterling family Christmas dinner had always been Vanessa's show, and this year was no different. She arrived 2 hours late, pulling up in her white Tesla, dragging in an army of ring lights and a camera crew she'd hired to document her authentic family Christmas experience for her lifestyle blog. I stood in the kitchen doorway, gently bouncing Lucas, who was fussing after missing his afternoon nap. I watched my mother, Patricia, frantically rearrange the entire dining room, not for comfort, but for Vanessa's filming setup. The air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon, but even thicker with the familiar tension that always followed Vanessa. My father, Robert, was in his usual corner, scrolling through his phone, perfecting his art of selective blindness, especially when it came to his daughter's drama. Vanessa had been hyping this dinner for weeks, calling it her family gratitude special. What she conveniently left out was that David had just returned from a grueling 6-month deployment overseas, or that we'd driven 3 hours specifically to introduce our son to his grandparents for the holidays. None of that mattered. It never did, not when it came to Vanessa's narrative. David emerged from the guest bedroom, looking sharp in his dress uniform. Even off-duty, he carried that quiet authority. He caught my eye across the room and gave me one of those small, steady smiles that always promised everything would be okay, even when I wasn't sure it would be. The dining room was transformed, looking like something out of a magazine. Grandma's antique candlesticks were moved, family photos rearranged, even the napkins swapped out for ones that photographed better. Vanessa directed her cameraman like it was a commercial shoot, which, in many ways, it was. My mom fussed around her, adjusting everything to meet Vanessa's exacting standards. The turkey, the side dishes, even the flowers, all for the camera. I'd learned long ago not to comment. Growing up, pointing out the absurdity only ever earned me lectures about supporting family and how some people had bigger dreams than others. The unspoken message was always clear. I was small-minded, jealous of Vanessa's vision, threatened by her ambition. David helped me settle Lucas into his high chair, an old solid wood one that had belonged to David's grandmother. It looked beautifully out of place amidst Vanessa's curated perfection. Lucas gurgled, reaching for his toys, blissfully unaware he was about to become an unwitting extra in his aunt's content. The meal began with Vanessa's usual gratitude speech, delivered directly to her camera, while the rest of us sat in awkward silence. 10 minutes about family traditions and followers, not a single mention of David's return or Lucas's first Christmas. When she finally signaled for filming to pause, everyone relaxed slightly. My mom started serving, making sure Vanessa's plate was immaculate before anyone else's. My dad carved the turkey, glancing nervously at the cameras. David and I exchanged weary glances, trying to eat while keeping Lucas entertained and quiet. The conversation, predictably, revolved around Vanessa, brand partnerships, collaborations, opportunities. My mom hung on every word. I tried to chime in with updates about our life at Fort Henderson, David's promotion, parenthood. My words just drifted into the air, met with polite nods before the spotlight swung back to Vanessa's world. It was like trying to add ingredients to a dish that was already finished and plated. David noticed. He always did. He'd ask me follow-up questions, drawing me back in, making me feel seen. He'd share stories about our military community, about how proud he was of me during his deployment. His efforts were kind, but they only highlighted how little interest my own family showed in my actual life. Lucas, for a 6-month-old, was remarkably well-behaved, content to chew his teething toys and observe. He'd babble occasionally, drawing brief smiles, before the adult conversation resumed its predictable orbit. He was fascinated by the camera lights, reaching for them with a baby's determined focus. Midway through dinner, Vanessa decided she needed candid family interaction footage. She had her cameraman position himself to capture natural holiday moments, as if performing for thousands of strangers was natural. She directed us to eat and talk normally while she provided commentary about the beautiful chaos of family gatherings. This is where things began to crumble slowly, subtly, until it was too late. Vanessa had always been a control freak, but the filming pressure, combined with her innate need to be the absolute center, pushed her stress levels through the roof. She kept calling for resets when conversations weren't perfect, when an expression wasn't right, when background noise interfered. Lucas, meanwhile, was getting tired. His cheerful babbling morphed into that desperate whimpering every parent recognizes as the prelude to a full meltdown. David and I tried everything: quiet songs, gentle bouncing, but the unfamiliar environment, disrupted nap, and constant commotion were overwhelming him. I suggested taking him to the guest room for a few minutes, just to decompress. But Vanessa immediately objected. "No, I'm in the middle of filming the heart of the segment. People leaving the table will ruin the content." She insisted babies were adaptable, that a little fussing was normal. My mom, Patricia, agreed, adding that I was being overly cautious. My dad just nodded, still glued to his plate. David's jaw tightened. I knew that look. He was choosing his words carefully. He gently suggested a short break from filming. But Vanessa, ever the performer, pivoted. She'd incorporate Lucas's fussing into her narrative about the beautiful messiness of real family life. She started speaking to her camera about flexibility and patience with little ones, how unexpected moments make the best memories. Lucas's whimpering escalated into actual, heart-wrenching sobs. I reached for him instinctively, but Vanessa held up her hand, stopping me. She was still filming, still trying to capture her authentic moment of holiday chaos. She seemed to think Lucas's distress added authenticity to her content. David's face had gone completely still, the expression he wore when confronting serious threats. He was watching Vanessa with an unnerving intensity, calculating, weighing options, searching for a diplomatic solution to protect our son. I tried again to reach Lucas, and again, Vanessa stopped me. This time, her voice was sharper. "You're being dramatic. A little crying never hurt anyone. I've babysat. Sometimes parents need to relax their overprotective instincts." Lucas's crying intensified, a desperate wail from a baby who had reached his limit. The sound filled the dining room, competing with Vanessa's relentless commentary about embracing chaos. She seemed utterly oblivious. Everyone else at the table had stopped eating, stopped pretending, stopped performing. Then it happened. Vanessa, clearly furious that Lucas's crying was overwhelming her audio and disrupting her segment, leaned across the table toward the high chair. Her hand moved so fast I barely registered it. The sharp crack of her palm against Lucas's cheek echoed through the suddenly silent room. Lucas's crying stopped instantly, replaced by a shocked gasp that felt like all the air had been sucked out. Then came a wail unlike anything I'd ever heard from him, a sound of pure bewilderment and pain that pierced straight through to my soul. His tiny cheek was already turning red where she'd struck him. Nobody moved. My mom sat frozen, fork halfway to her mouth. My dad's eyes were wide with shock, but he remained glued to his chair. The cameraman kept filming, unsure what to do. Vanessa herself seemed momentarily stunned by what she'd done. But David moved. He rose from his chair with the controlled precision of a soldier. No rush, no sudden explosion, just the deliberate unfolding of a man who had made a decision. His 6 feet 3 inches frame seemed to fill the room, his dress uniform making him even more imposing. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that commanded instant obedience. "Turn off the camera." It wasn't a request. The cameraman immediately complied, the red recording light vanishing. The room fell into an even deeper silence. David walked around the table to Lucas, lifting our sobbing son with the gentle competence of a seasoned father. Lucas buried his face in David's shoulder, his cries immediately subsiding to hiccuping sobs. "Vanessa," David said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "You just struck my infant son." He paused, letting the words hang. "I need you to explain to me why you thought that was acceptable." Vanessa's face cycled through shades of pale shock to defensive red. "He was being disruptive," she blurted, her voice higher than usual. "I was trying to teach him that crying isn't appropriate at the dinner table. Sometimes children need clear boundaries." "He's 6 months old," David replied, that eerily calm tone still present. "He doesn't understand boundaries. He understands that someone hurt him." He adjusted Lucas, gently checking the faint red mark on his cheek. "And you struck him hard enough to leave a mark." The room remained a frozen tableau. My mom finally whispered, "Vanessa, honey, you shouldn't have." "Don't," David interrupted, not raising his voice, but somehow commanding immediate attention. "Don't minimize this. Don't excuse it. And don't you dare suggest that what just happened was acceptable in any way." He turned his attention back to Vanessa, who was now desperately looking around for support that wasn't coming. "You are going to pack up your equipment and leave now. And you are not going to come near my family again until you can explain to me how you plan to ensure this never happens again." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. "You can't just, this is my family too. You can't ban me from family gatherings." Her voice gained strength, defensive anger replacing shock. "You're being completely unreasonable. It was barely a tap. You're acting like I committed some terrible crime." David's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. Anyone who had served under him would have recognized the warning signs. "Barely a tap, that left a mark on my infant son's face," he said, each word precise. "A tap administered because he was crying, which is literally the only way babies have to communicate distress." He looked around the table, his gaze settling on each family member. "And not one of you moved to stop her. Not one of you said a word. You all sat here and watched someone strike a baby, and you're now trying to minimize it because she's family." The truth of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. My mom's face crumpled with what might have been shame. My dad finally looked up, though he couldn't meet David's gaze. Vanessa's defensive anger wavered, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. But it was too late. David had made his decision. "Natalie," he said, turning to me, his expression gentle despite everything. "Get Lucas's things. We're leaving." He paused, looking back at the family that had just revealed its true nature. "And we won't be coming back." I stood on shaking legs, my whole body still reeling. Lucas was calm now in David's arms, but I could see the confusion in his wide eyes, the way he kept touching his cheek. A wave of protective fury, unlike anything I'd ever known, washed over me. As I gathered our things from the guest room, I could hear voices from the dining room, Vanessa's, raised in justification, Patricia's, pleading, David's, still calm but unmovable. By the time I returned with our bag, the conversation was over. David stood by the front door, Lucas in his arms, the diaper bag slung over his shoulder. His face was set in the way that meant the decision was final. Vanessa stood near the dining room doorway, her face blotchy with tears and anger, my mom hovering nearby, wringing her hands. "This is insane," Vanessa called out as we headed for the door. "You're destroying our family over nothing. Over absolutely nothing. He's fine. Look at him. He's not even crying anymore." David stopped at the threshold and turned back one last time. "The fact that you think striking a baby is nothing tells me everything I need to know about your judgment," he said. "And the fact that the rest of this family is willing to excuse it tells me everything I need to know about their priorities." He opened the door and gestured for me. As we walked to the car, I heard my mom calling, begging us to come back, to talk this through, to not let one incident ruin the holiday. But David's stride never faltered. Neither did mine. We drove home in silence, Lucas sleeping peacefully. The faintest pink mark remained on his cheek. David's hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw still set. It wasn't until we were safely back in our own home, Lucas fed and settled in his crib, that the full weight of it hit me. I sat on our couch, still in my Christmas dress, and began to cry, not just for that evening, but for all the years of feeling invisible, dismissed, and overlooked by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. David sat beside me and pulled me close. He understood that sometimes there were no words. Comfort was just presence. "I'm proud of you," I finally whispered against his shoulder. For what? For standing up. For protecting him. For not letting them minimize what happened. I pulled back. I don't think anyone has ever defended me like that before. His expression softened, the way it did just for us. That's what real family does, Natalie. They protect each other. They don't excuse abuse, and they don't ask you to tolerate the intolerable for the sake of peace. Later that night, replaying everything, David's words resonated deeply. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of experiences with people who demanded my silence, my accommodation, my willingness to accept less than I deserved. But this time was different. Someone had stood up. Someone had said no. Someone had made it clear that the behavior was unacceptable and that there would be consequences. As I drifted off to sleep, with my baby safe in the next room, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the solid peace of knowing my boundaries were respected and my worth recognized. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning. That Christmas dinner would set in motion a series of discoveries that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my own strength. But for that night, it was enough to know someone had finally stood up for what was right. The war truly began 3 days later with a phone call. David was feeding Lucas his morning bottle, and I was staring at the untouched Christmas presents under our tree. My mom, Patricia, sounded strained, almost breathless. "Natalie, honey, I know you're upset, but we need to talk. Vanessa feels terrible. She didn't sleep at all last night. She wants to apologize, but she can't if you won't answer her calls." I held the phone away, looking at David, who watched me with concern. Lucas gurgled happily, oblivious. The red mark on his cheek was barely visible now, but I could still see it. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "She hit my baby. She struck a 6-month-old child because he was crying. I'm not sure what there is to discuss. She barely touched him, Natalie. You're making this into something much bigger than it was. People make mistakes when they're stressed. You know how important her work is to her, and having the filming disrupted," I interrupted, heat rising in my chest. "Mom," she slapped Lucas across the face because he was interfering with her social media content. "Do you hear how that sounds?" Patricia's sigh crackled through the phone. "You've always been dramatic about these things, sweetheart. Ever since you were little, you've blown situations out of proportion. Vanessa was just trying to teach him some boundaries. Sometimes children need firm guidance." That phrase hit me like cold water. "You've always been dramatic." How many times had I heard it? How many times had my legitimate concerns been dismissed with that exact explanation? I gripped the phone tighter. "He's 6 months old, Mom. He doesn't understand boundaries. He understands that someone hurt him for expressing a basic need." "Now you sound like David," she said, and there was something in her tone that made me pause. "He's always been very rigid about rules and procedures. Military men often are. But families work differently than the army, Natalie. Families require flexibility and forgiveness." David looked up from Lucas's bottle, one eyebrow raised. He'd heard enough. I could see him making mental notes, gathering intelligence. "What does David have to do with this?" I asked. "Well, he's the one who made the big scene. Vanessa said he was completely unreasonable, ordering people around like he was commanding troops. She said he threatened to ban her from the family." My mom's voice trailed off, as if David's behavior was the real outrage. Something cold settled in my stomach. "Mom, David protected our son from someone who had just hit him. That's what fathers do. That's what anyone should do when they see a child being hurt." "But Vanessa is family, honey. Family means giving people second chances. It means not letting one mistake destroy relationships that have been built over decades. David doesn't understand that because he didn't grow up with us. He doesn't know how we handle things." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, each exchange making me feel more disoriented. Patricia painted a version of events that bore little resemblance to what I'd witnessed. In her narrative, Vanessa had barely made contact, Everyone had overreacted, and David had turned a minor family disagreement into a major crisis through his inflexibility and outsider's perspective. When I finally hung up, David was watching me, an expression on his face like he was debriefing after a difficult mission. "Let me guess," he said. "It's our fault." "According to my mother, yes." "Vanessa feels terrible, but I'm being dramatic and you're being controlling because you don't understand how families work." I slumped against the kitchen counter, exhausted. And how do families work, according to her? Apparently, they work by excusing abuse and expecting the victims to be understanding about it. She had actually said he didn't understand family dynamics because he hadn't grown up with them. "She's right about that," David said quietly, burping Lucas. "I didn't grow up with them. I grew up in a family where adults protected children instead of making excuses for people who hurt them." The difference hit me with unexpected force. David's family had its own challenges, but I'd never heard his parents dismiss abuse or ask victims to be more understanding. His grandmother, Eleanor, had been fiercely protective, never tolerating anyone who tried to harm her grandchildren. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was my father, Robert. He spoke in the careful tone he used for mediating conflicts, clearly coached by Patricia. "Natalie, I think we all need to take a step back and look at this situation more objectively. Your mother told me about her conversation, and it sounds like there might be some miscommunication about what actually happened." "Dad, there's no miscommunication. Vanessa hit Lucas. Multiple people saw it. There's nothing unclear." "Well, that's just it. Vanessa said she was just trying to get his attention, maybe redirect his fussing. She said she might have been a little firmer than necessary, but she never intended to hurt him. And honestly, looking at him now, he seems fine. Children are resilient." I stared at the ceiling, trying to process the cognitive dissonance. My own father was explaining to me what had happened to my own child. "Dad, intent doesn't matter when we're talking about hitting a baby. The impact matters. The fact that she thought striking him was an appropriate response to crying matters. But that's the thing, sweetheart. She's not experienced with babies. She was just trying to help in the moment. Sometimes people make poor choices when they're trying to handle unfamiliar situations." The conversation mirrored the one with my mom. Every concern I raised was met with an explanation for why it wasn't really a problem. Every time I centered Lucas, the discussion was redirected to Vanessa's feelings, her inexperience, her stress, her good intentions. By the time he hung up, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I misunderstood? Was I overreacting? The voices of my parents, people I'd trusted my entire life, were telling me my perceptions were wrong, my protective instincts misguided, David's response disproportionate. David found me at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, looking, he later said, like I was in shell shock. He'd finished Lucas's nap routine and immediately recognized the shift. "What did your dad say?" he asked, sitting across from me. "He said that Vanessa didn't mean to hurt Lucas, that she was just trying to help, that maybe she was a little firmer than necessary, but children are resilient." I repeated the words flatly. David was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then he asked, "What do you think happened yesterday?" The question surprised me. No one else had asked me what I thought. Everyone had been telling me what to think, explaining what had really happened, correcting my understanding of events I'd witnessed with my own eyes. "I think my sister hit my baby because he was crying and it was interfering with her filming. I think it was hard enough to leave a mark and shock him into silence. I think it was completely inappropriate and potentially harmful." I paused, feeling some clarity return as I spoke my own truth. "And I think my parents are more interested in protecting Vanessa from consequences than they are in protecting Lucas from being hurt again." "That's what I think." "That's what I think too," David said. "So the question is, do you trust your own perceptions, or do you trust people who are telling you that what you saw didn't really happen?" It was a fair question, but devastating. The people asking me to doubt myself were my parents. The person supporting my perceptions was my husband, someone I'd known for 5 years, who consistently demonstrated better judgment and clearer moral boundaries than my family of origin. The third phone call came that afternoon, and this time, it was Vanessa herself. Her voice was thick with tears, trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. This was the sister I remembered from childhood, vulnerable, seeking connection. For a moment, a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be it. Maybe she'd finally acknowledge what she'd done. "I'm glad you called, Vanessa. Lucas is okay, but I was really shocked. I need to understand why you thought hitting him was an appropriate response to his crying." "That's just it," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I don't think I really hit him. I think I just touched his cheek to get his attention. And maybe because everyone was so tense about the filming, it seemed like more than it was. You know how these things can get blown out of proportion when emotions are running high." The hope I'd felt moments earlier evaporated. She wasn't calling to apologize or take responsibility. She was calling to continue the family narrative that what I'd witnessed hadn't really happened. "Vanessa, there was a sound when your hand made contact with his face. There was a mark on his cheek." He went from crying to completely silent in shock before he started wailing. That's not a gentle touch to get someone's attention. But that's what I'm trying to tell you. I think everyone's perception was distorted by the stress of the situation, the cameras, the disrupted filming, David's reaction. It all created this atmosphere where a normal interaction got interpreted as something much more serious. I found myself gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. "Are you saying I imagined the mark on my baby's face?" "I'm saying that maybe what looked like a mark was just the natural redness that comes from crying. Maybe what sounded like a slap was just the sound of contact that seemed louder because the room was so quiet. Maybe what felt like a big deal in the moment isn't actually as serious as it seemed." The conversation continued in this vein for 20 minutes. Vanessa had crafted an alternative narrative, convinced herself she was the victim of misunderstanding. When I finally ended the call, I felt like I'd been wrestling with smoke. David found me in Lucas's nursery, watching him sleep. He lay on his back, one tiny fist curled near his face, completely peaceful and trusting. The sight of him, so small and defenseless, crystallized something inside me. "She's gaslighting me," I said without turning around. "All of them are. They're trying to make me believe that what I saw didn't really happen." "Yes," David said quietly. "They are." "Why would they do that? Why would my own family try to make me doubt my own perceptions about something this serious?" David joined me at the crib. "Because acknowledging what really happened would require them to take action they're not willing to take. It would mean holding Vanessa accountable, which might disrupt their family dynamic. It would mean admitting they failed to protect Lucas, which would force them to examine their own behavior. So instead, they make you the problem." The fourth call came that evening, just as we were settling in to watch a movie. Patricia again, but her tone had shifted from pleading to frustration. "Natalie, I'm concerned about how you're handling this situation. You're being very rigid and unforgiving, which isn't like you. I'm wondering if maybe the stress of new motherhood is affecting your judgment." I felt David tense beside me. The suggestion that my judgment was compromised by postpartum issues was a particularly low blow. "Mom, my judgment is fine. My priorities are clear. Protecting my child from people who think it's acceptable to hit him isn't negotiable." "But that's exactly what I'm talking about. You're characterizing this as hitting when it was clearly something much less serious. You're creating conflict where none needs to exist. You're making choices that are going to damage family relationships permanently over something that could be resolved with basic communication and forgiveness. What would resolution look like to you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Vanessa apologizes for the misunderstanding. You accept that she didn't mean any harm. David acknowledges that his reaction was excessive, and we all move forward with better communication and more patience for each other's differences." I let that sink in. In Patricia's vision, everyone bore equal responsibility. Vanessa would offer a non-apology, I would accept blame for misinterpreting, David would admit overreacting, and Lucas, the actual victim, would be completely absent from the conversation. "What about Lucas?" I asked. "What does resolution look like for him?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what protections would be put in place? What boundaries would be established to keep him safe at future gatherings? What accountability measures would ensure that Vanessa has processed why hitting a baby is never acceptable?" Patricia was quiet. Then, impatiently, "You're overthinking this. He's fine. He's not going to remember any of this. You're creating trauma where none exists. And there it was, the heart of our fundamental disagreement. In my family's worldview, trauma only existed if the victim remembered it. A baby couldn't be truly harmed if he couldn't form lasting memories. Adult comfort and family harmony took precedence over protecting children from experiences they might not remember. After I hung up, David and I sat in silence. The movie remained paused. This wasn't going to blow over. My family wasn't going to understand. We were going to have to make decisions about how to move forward with people who fundamentally disagreed with our basic values about protecting children. I feel like I'm going crazy, I admitted. 3 different people have told me that what I saw didn't really happen. People I've trusted my entire life are asking me to doubt my own perceptions. That's the point, David said. They need you to doubt yourself, because if you trust what you saw, you'll make choices they don't want you to make. If you believe Lucas was actually hurt, you'll protect him from people who might hurt him again. They can't have that. But why? Why is protecting Vanessa from consequences more important than protecting Lucas from being hurt? David was quiet for a long time. I think your family has spent a long time organizing itself around managing Vanessa's needs and emotions. She's the center of attention, the source of drama, the person everyone has to accommodate. Protecting that system is more important than protecting individual members who threaten it. The observation hit me with uncomfortable accuracy. Growing up, family decisions often hinged on Vanessa's mood, her plans. My own achievements had been downplayed if they threatened to overshadow her. I'd accepted it as normal. It never occurred to me that this system could become so entrenched it would prioritize Vanessa's comfort over a baby's safety. The final call of the day came close to midnight. I was in bed, still awake, replaying the conversations. When I saw Vanessa's name, I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Natalie, I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about how to fix this mess. Her voice was softer, less defensive, more sad. I miss you. I miss being close to you like we were when we were kids. For a moment, a pang of nostalgia. There had been years when we were genuinely close. I miss that too, I said honestly. But I need you to understand why yesterday was so serious. Lucas is my baby, and seeing someone hurt him triggered every protective instinct I have. I get that, I really do. And I would never intentionally hurt him. You have to know that about me. Maybe I was too focused on the filming, maybe I wasn't thinking clearly, but I would never deliberately harm a child. It felt like progress. An acknowledgement that her judgment had been compromised. For the first time all day, I felt we might find common ground. Thank you for saying that. I know you wouldn't hurt him on purpose, but impact matters as much as intent. And the impact was that he got hurt. What I need is some assurance that you understand why it happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Of course. I think what I need to do is be more mindful when I'm around children, especially when I'm stressed or working. Maybe I should ask for help instead of trying to handle situations on my own. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it was movement. We talked for a few more minutes about boundaries, communication, balancing family and work. When we hung up, I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe this could be worked out. But the next morning brought a text message that shattered any hope. It was from Chloe Martinez, our neighbor and close friend at Fort Henderson. The message was brief but devastating. Saw Vanessa's Instagram story. Are you okay? I opened Instagram with shaking hands, navigating to Vanessa's account. The story was titled Family Drama and Moving Forward. It was a carefully crafted narrative about the challenges of blending families with different parenting styles. She talked about holiday gatherings, the stress of documenting family moments, the importance of forgiveness and grace when misunderstandings occur. According to her, there had been a minor disagreement, escalated by miscommunication. She painted herself as someone trying to help with a fussy baby, misunderstood by overprotective parents unfamiliar with extended family dynamics. She never mentioned hitting Lucas, never acknowledged any harm. She framed the entire conflict as a learning experience about family communication. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Her followers praised her maturity, her grace, her commitment to family. I screenshot the entire story, then sat staring at my phone in disbelief. Less than 12 hours after what felt like a breakthrough conversation about accountability, Vanessa had publicly reframed the entire incident as a misunderstanding caused by my overreaction and David's inflexibility. She had taken our private conversation about her poor judgment and transformed it into a public narrative about other people's unreasonable expectations. She had positioned herself as the victim of family drama rather than the adult who had struck a baby. And she had done it all while maintaining plausible deniability, never technically lying, but never telling the truth. When David came home from his morning run and found me crying at the kitchen table, I showed him the phone without saying anything. He read through the Instagram story twice, his expression growing grimmer. "She played you," he said finally. The late-night call, the apparent acknowledgement of responsibility, the promise to be more mindful, all of it was designed to get information she could use to craft this narrative. I felt foolish for believing it was genuine remorse. More than that, I felt betrayed by someone I'd loved and trusted since childhood, someone who had used my willingness to give her another chance as an opportunity to manipulate. The phone started ringing again, but this time I didn't answer. It was Patricia, probably calling to discuss Vanessa's story, encouraging me to see it as a positive step. But I was done listening to explanations about why my perceptions were wrong and my boundaries unreasonable. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in a family conflict. I started documenting everything. I wrote down exactly what had happened, direct quotes from everyone. I saved screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram story and the comments. I made notes about each phone conversation, the specific language my family used to minimize the incident and question my judgment. For the first time, I was treating my family like potential adversaries. As I organized the evidence of their gaslighting and manipulation, I began to understand. This pattern had been happening for much longer than just the past few days. This was how they had always handled conflicts that threatened their preferred narrative. This was how they had trained me over decades to doubt my own perceptions and prioritize family harmony over my own well-being. But this time was different. This time the victim wasn't just me. It was my infant son. Someone who couldn't advocate for himself. This time I had a partner who supported my perceptions. And this time I was going to fight back. The documentation revealed patterns I hadn't consciously recognized. Scrolling through old texts, old social media, a clear picture emerged. Every time Vanessa created a problem, the same cycle played out. Shock, then explanations and excuses, then pressure on everyone else to accommodate her version. I found a text thread from 2 years earlier, when Vanessa showed up 4 hours late to Grandma Eleanor's memorial service, because she was filming a makeup collaboration. My hurt feelings about her absence were reframed as selfishness during a difficult time. Another thread from last spring, Vanessa borrowed my mom's car, returned it with thousands of dollars in damage from a minor parking lot incident, but the family conversation focused on how accidents happen. My mom ended up paying the deductible herself. The more I looked, the clearer it became. I had been trained to accept this dynamic. I'd learned to minimize my needs, question my perceptions, prioritize everyone else's comfort. The Christmas dinner wasn't an anomaly. It was the most extreme example of a pattern that had shaped my life for decades. David found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed screenshots and handwritten notes, like a case file. He poured coffee and sat across from me. "This looks like intelligence gathering," he observed. "That's exactly what it is. I'm trying to understand how they do this, how they consistently manage to make me feel like I'm the problem when they're the ones causing harm." I gestured to a timeline I'd created. "Look at this pattern. Every single time. The same thing happened." David examined it. Incident, denial, reframing, pressure to forgive, eventual acceptance of the family narrative. It's sophisticated. They've created a system that protects Vanessa from consequences while training everyone else to doubt their own judgment. But why me specifically? Why am I always the one being asked to be more understanding, more forgiving, more flexible? Because you're the one who challenges. You're the one who notices when things don't add up. You're the one who asks uncomfortable questions. He pointed to my timeline. In every case, you were the person who initially called out the problematic behavior. They need to neutralize you because you're the threat to their system. The observation resonated. I'd always thought of myself as helpful, wanting to improve family dynamics. But from their perspective, I was a disruptor. My phone buzzed. Another text from Patricia. Honey, I saw that you read Vanessa's Instagram story. I hope you can see that she's really trying to move forward in a positive way. Maybe we could all get together this weekend to talk through everything calmly. I showed it to David. They're trying to reset the narrative again, he said, shaking his head. Get everyone in the same room, apply social pressure, and convince you to accept their version of events for the sake of family peace. But what if I'm wrong? What if I am being too rigid, too unforgiving? What if there really is a way to work through this that doesn't require cutting people out? David set down his coffee cup and looked at me seriously. Let me ask you something. If one of my soldiers struck a baby during a family gathering and then spent the next week convincing everyone that it hadn't really happened, while publicly reframing themselves as the victim, what would you think I should do? The question clarified everything instantly. If this were anyone else, I would be horrified by the gaslighting. I would advise them to protect their child, to maintain clear boundaries. I would tell them to document everything. Right, I answered. So why is your family different? I didn't have a good answer. The only reason I considered compromise was because these were people I'd loved my entire life, whose approval I'd sought since childhood. But none of that justified exposing Lucas to people who might hurt him again. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Chloe Martinez. She'd been following the situation and had information that changed everything. Natalie, I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how you're going to take it. I've been going through Vanessa's social media more carefully, and I found some posts from earlier this year that I think you need to see. She sent me screenshots. Several posts from Vanessa's account, dating back to when Lucas was first born. One showed a professional photo shoot using baby props, captioned about new beginnings and expanding family. Another featured her holding a newborn, with text about the blessings of being an aunt. The problem? The timing. Both posts were published weeks before Lucas was actually born, using stock photos and borrowed babies to create content about an experience she hadn't had yet. She'd been monetizing her relationship with my unborn child, creating sponsored content about our family moments before they'd even happened. There's more, Chloe said when I called her back. I found a whole series of posts about family traditions, holiday celebrations, and multi-generational gatherings that all feature photos from Christmas dinner last year. The one you and David missed because of his deployment. She's been creating this narrative about close family relationships that doesn't actually exist. I felt sick. Vanessa had built a brand around family content that portrayed relationships and experiences that were largely fiction. Her followers believed she was documenting authentic moments, but she was crafting staged content designed for engagement and sponsorships. The Christmas dinner incident suddenly made terrifying sense. Vanessa hadn't just been filming for personal documentation. She'd been creating content for a business that depended on a specific image of family harmony. Lucas's crying had threatened not just her filming schedule, but her entire brand identity. He and I were just props in her production. And when Lucas interfered by acting like a normal baby, she prioritized her content over his well-being. The realization was devastating, but also clarifying. This hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment by someone stressed. This had been a calculated decision by someone who viewed our family as raw material for her business and who was willing to harm a child to protect her commercial interest. I spent the evening going through more of Vanessa's content, documenting the extent to which she'd been monetizing our family without our knowledge or consent. She'd used photos of our wedding, stories about David's deployment, and speculation about our future children to create sponsored posts. Most disturbing were the posts about grandparents and family traditions, portraying my parents as deeply involved, loving grandparents, despite their minimal interest in truly developing relationships with Lucas. The gap between Vanessa's public narrative and our private reality was enormous. The next morning, a flurry of texts from family members, all urging me to attend a family meeting. The messages used remarkably similar language about healing, communication, and moving forward together, clearly coordinated. But I was done being managed. Instead of responding, I called my family's insurance company to report the incident. I wasn't filing a claim, but I wanted it documented. The representative was professional, but clearly disturbed, asking multiple times if I needed child protection services. I also called Lucas's pediatrician, Dr. Rebecca Walsh. She immediately scheduled an appointment and asked for photos. The pediatric appointment was both validating and heartbreaking. Dr. Walsh examined Lucas, documented the fading mark, and asked detailed questions. This is a cause for serious concern, regardless of intent or family relationship. Parents need to trust their protective instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. Your job is to keep Lucas safe, not to manage other people's feelings about your safety measures. She also provided resources for family violence and documenting incidents for potential legal proceedings. I hadn't considered legal action, but having the information felt empowering after days of being told my concerns were overblown. That afternoon, I received a call from Captain Ryan Torres, one of David's closest colleagues. He and his wife Maria had become good friends. Natalie, I hope you don't mind me calling, but Maria and I wanted you to know we're behind you 100%. What happened to Lucas is unacceptable, and the way your family is handling it is concerning. I felt a wave of relief. After days of being told I was overreacting, it was powerful to hear from other parents who found the incident as disturbing as I did. Thank you, Ryan. I've been starting to doubt my own judgment. Don't. You're a good mother, and you're doing exactly what you should be doing. David is lucky to have a partner who will stand up for their child, even when it's difficult. Ryan also shared something David hadn't told me yet. David had been consulting with military legal services. The military took family violence seriously, and there were resources available for service members dealing with civilian family conflicts that might affect their security clearance or job performance. The conversation helped me realize David and I weren't alone. We had a community of people who shared our values. Our family of choice was standing behind us. That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I drafted a group text to Patricia, Robert, and Vanessa, clearly stating our boundaries. Calm but firm, explaining we wouldn't attend gatherings until Vanessa acknowledged what happened and demonstrated genuine accountability. The response was immediate and intense. My phone buzzed within minutes. Patricia called in hysterics, begging me not to destroy the family. Robert texted, asking me to reconsider. Vanessa sent a series of messages alternating between anger and hurt, accusing me of being vindictive. But the message that stopped me cold came from Linda, a distant cousin. Her text was brief, devastating, saw the Instagram situation. This isn't the first time. Call me when you're ready to hear about the others. I stared at the message before showing it to David. What others? He asked. I have no idea, but Linda wouldn't say something like that unless she had specific information. I called Linda immediately, my hands shaking. She answered on the first ring. Natalie, honey, I've been watching the situation unfold, and I think it's time you knew some things about your family that they've been keeping from you. There have been other incidents over the years. Times when Vanessa hurt people, usually children, and the family covered it up or explained it away. I never said anything because it wasn't my place. But watching them do it to your baby, I can't stay quiet anymore. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and changed everything I thought I knew about my family history. Linda told me about incidents dating back to when Vanessa was a teenager, times she'd been rough with younger cousins, harsh with children she was babysitting, inappropriate with kids at family gatherings. In every case, the family had intervened to minimize the situation and protect Vanessa from consequences. Parents were told their children were being dramatic or oversensitive. Witnesses were asked to keep quiet for the sake of family harmony. Vanessa was coached on what to say, but never actually held accountable. I've watched your parents train that girl to believe she can hurt people without consequences, and I've watched them train everyone else to accept it, Natalie. When I saw what happened at Christmas dinner, and then saw how they were handling it, I knew it was time to speak up. Linda also revealed something that explained a lot about the family dynamic. Vanessa had been born with some developmental delays that required extensive early intervention and special education services. Patricia and Robert had spent years advocating for her, fighting for accommodations, protecting her from situations where she might struggle or fail. The problem was they'd never transitioned from protecting a child with special needs to holding an adult accountable for harmful behavior. They'd continued making excuses and providing accommodations long past the point where Vanessa was capable of understanding and controlling her actions. "She knows exactly what she's doing," Linda said. "She's learned that if she can make people feel sorry for her, or if she can convince them that she's just misunderstood, she can get away with almost anything. And your parents enable it because they've spent so many years seeing her as vulnerable that they can't recognize when she's being manipulative." By the time I hung up with Linda, I felt like I'd been given a completely different map of my family territory. Suddenly, decades of confusing interactions made sense. The pattern of protecting Vanessa at everyone else's expense wasn't just a recent development, it was a system refined over years. More importantly, Linda's information made it clear that Lucas wasn't Vanessa's first victim, and he wouldn't be her last if the family continued enabling her. Christmas dinner wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the latest example of a long-standing pattern hidden from me because I'd been too young, too distant, or too willing to accept family explanations. The next morning, I woke with absolute clarity. I wasn't just protecting Lucas from one bad incident. I was breaking a generational cycle of abuse and enabling that had been damaging children in my family for years. I called Linda back and asked if she would document what she'd told me, provide written statements. She agreed immediately, saying she'd been carrying the guilt of staying silent for too long. I reached out to other family members who might have information. Some were reluctant, but others were relieved to finally talk about things they'd witnessed and been asked to forget. By the end of the week, I had a comprehensive picture of how my family had been protecting Vanessa from consequences while putting other people's children at risk. I had written statements from multiple witnesses, documentation of previous incidents, and clear evidence that the Christmas dinner event was part of a much larger pattern. David and I spent that weekend planning our next steps. We weren't interested in revenge or public humiliation, but we were committed to protecting Lucas and potentially preventing future incidents with other children. We decided to share our documentation with family members who had children, to give them the information they needed to make informed decisions about their own safety. We also decided to maintain our boundaries, regardless of how the family responded. Linda's information had made it clear this wasn't a problem that could be solved with better communication. This was a problem that required fundamental changes in accountability and consequences. Changes my family had shown no willingness to make. Most importantly, we decided to build our own family traditions and support systems that didn't depend on people who prioritized maintaining dysfunction over protecting children. Lucas deserved to grow up in an environment where his safety was never negotiable, where adults took responsibility for their actions, and where his well-being wasn't sacrificed for someone else's comfort. As I organized the evidence, preparing to share it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of having complete information and the power to act on it. I was no longer the confused family member being told my perceptions were wrong. I was someone who understood exactly what was happening and why, and who had the resources to respond appropriately. The war that had begun with a slapped baby was about to become a battle for the truth. And for the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt confident about which side would win. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter from Vanessa's attorney, demanding I cease what they called a defamation campaign against their client. The letter claimed I was spreading false information and damaging Vanessa's professional reputation. I stared at the legal letterhead in disbelief. I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't spoken to anyone outside immediate family and close friends. The only campaign I'd conducted was documenting actual events and sharing factual information with relatives who had young children. David read the letter over my shoulder, his expression growing darker. "They're trying to intimidate you into silence," he said. "This is what people do when they know they're guilty, but can't afford to have the truth come out." The letter demanded I sign a statement acknowledging no assault had occurred, that any claims about Vanessa striking Lucas were fabricated, and that I would refrain from making future statements that could damage her business interest. In exchange, they wouldn't pursue legal action. Business relationships, I repeated, feeling the full weight of what this revealed. She's not worried about family harmony or healing relationships. She's worried about her brand and her income stream. That afternoon, I called the law office of Janet Morrison, an attorney Linda had recommended who specialized in family law and child protection cases. Janet agreed to see me immediately. Her initial assessment was both reassuring and concerning. The letter is largely bluster, she told me after reviewing my documentation. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims, and you have substantial evidence. But the fact that they're escalating to legal threats suggests they're feeling genuine pressure. Janet helped me understand that Vanessa's business model depended heavily on maintaining a specific public image. If sponsors and followers learned about her history with children, the financial impact could be devastating. The legal threats weren't about reputation, they were about income. I want you to prepare for them to escalate further, Janet warned. People with a lot to lose can become dangerous when they feel cornered. Document everything, stay safe, and don't engage directly with any of them until we develop a comprehensive strategy. Our strategy session with Janet revealed options I hadn't considered. We could file for a restraining order. We could pursue our own legal action for intentional infliction of emotional distress. We could report the incident to Child Protective Services. Most importantly, Janet helped me understand that I wasn't required to keep family secrets that put children at risk. The evidence I'd gathered about previous incidents wasn't gossip, it was information other parents had a right to know. That evening, I made copies of everything and prepared packages for family members with young children. Each included documentation of the Christmas dinner, witness statements about previous events, and information about Vanessa's pattern. I wasn't asking anyone to choose sides. I was simply providing information. The response was swift and explosive. Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from family members I hadn't spoken to in months. Some were supportive, thanking me for information that explained incidents they'd witnessed but been told to forget. Others were furious, accusing me of trying to destroy the family. Patricia called in hysterics, demanding I explain why I was attacking Vanessa with lies and propaganda. She'd apparently seen some of the documentation and was devastated by what Linda and others had shared. Those things happened years ago, she sobbed. Vanessa was just a child herself in some of those situations. She didn't understand what she was doing. Why are you dragging up ancient history to hurt her now? Because it's not ancient history, Mom. It's a pattern that's continuing today, and other parents deserve to know about that pattern when they're making decisions about their children's safety. But she's changed. She's grown up. She would never intentionally hurt a child now. She hit Lucas 6 days ago, Mom. Whatever changes you think she's made clearly haven't addressed the fundamental problem. The conversation deteriorated from there, Patricia alternating between begging me to retract the information and threatening to cut me out of the family. It was the same emotional manipulation I'd experienced my entire life, but this time, I recognized it and refused to be swayed. Robert's response was different, but equally revealing. He called late that night, speaking in the controlled tone he used for crises. Natalie, I understand you're upset, but this approach is going to hurt everyone, including you and David. If this information becomes public, it could affect David's military career. Have you thought about the security clearance implications of being involved in a family scandal? It was a low blow, trying to use David's professional obligations to pressure me into silence. But it also revealed how little Robert understood military values. The military didn't penalize service members for protecting children or reporting abuse. Quite the opposite. Dad, David's career is built on integrity and protecting people who can't protect themselves. His command would be more concerned if he failed to protect his own child from someone with a history of violence. But Vanessa doesn't have a history of violence. These are isolated incidents that happened years apart, mostly when she was young herself. You're creating a narrative that makes her sound like a dangerous predator when she's just someone who's made some mistakes. Mistakes are accidents, Dad. Patterns are choices. And a pattern of hurting children, followed by a pattern of avoiding consequences, isn't something I'm going to help hide anymore. The most devastating call came from my cousin Sarah, who had been present during several of the incidents Linda described. Sarah was now a mother of 2 young children, and she'd received one of my information packages. Natalie, I need you to know that I believe everything you've documented. I was there for some of those incidents, and I've been carrying guilt about staying quiet for years. Her voice was shaky but determined. When I saw what happened to Lucas and then saw how everyone was handling it, I realized I couldn't protect my own kids if I couldn't even acknowledge what I'd witnessed. Sarah shared details about an incident from her teenage years that hadn't made it into Linda's account. During a family reunion, Vanessa had pushed Sarah's younger brother down a flight of stairs after he'd accidentally knocked over something she was filming. The boy suffered a concussion and bruises, but the family explained it as an accident and forbade Sarah from talking about what she'd actually seen. I was 17 and scared of causing family drama, so I went along with the story, but I've regretted it ever since. And when I had my own children, I made sure they were never alone with Vanessa, even though I couldn't explain why to other family members. Sarah's testimony was powerful. But Sarah also revealed something that changed my understanding of the current situation. Natalie, there's something else you need to know. Vanessa isn't just worried about her current business. She's been in talks with a major network about a reality show centered around her family content. The Christmas dinner footage was supposed to be part of her audition reel. The information hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa hadn't just been creating content for existing followers. She'd been filming us for a potential television show without our knowledge or consent. Lucas's first Christmas had been treated as raw material for entertainment. And when he'd interfered by acting like a normal baby, she'd prioritized the footage over his well-being. The network executives are supposed to review her submission this week, Sarah continued. That's probably why she's escalating the legal threats. If this information becomes public before they make their decision, it could destroy the biggest opportunity she's ever had. I shared this information with David. His reaction was immediate and intense, not anger, but the cold fury of someone who'd realized the full scope of a threat he'd underestimated. She exploited our family for commercial purposes without our consent. And when our infant son interfered with her production, she assaulted him, he said, his voice deadly calm. And now she's threatening legal action to prevent us from protecting other children from similar treatment. David's military training taught him to identify and neutralize threats systematically. He approached this with the same methodical precision he brought to tactical planning. We're not just dealing with a family conflict anymore, he told me. We're dealing with someone who's willing to harm children for financial gain and use legal intimidation to cover it up. That makes her a legitimate threat that needs to be addressed through appropriate channels. The next morning, David contacted his command to report the situation. His commanding officer, Colonel Martinez, made it clear that the military expected service members to report child abuse and protect their families. The service takes these situations very seriously. We can't have personnel being blackmailed or intimidated by family members, especially when child safety is involved. We'll provide whatever support you need. The military's backing was both practical and psychological. It meant David wouldn't face professional consequences, and it gave us access to military legal resources. More importantly, it validated our decision. That afternoon, Janet Morrison called with an update. After reviewing our documentation and witness statements, she drafted a response that turned the tables completely. Instead of defending against defamation claims, we were putting Vanessa on notice about potential legal action for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and using our family for commercial purposes without consent. The beauty of truth as a defense, Janet explained, is that it forces the other side to prove their claims are false. Given the evidence you've assembled, that's going to be very difficult for them to do. More likely, they'll realize that pursuing this legally will only create more public exposure of information they want to keep private. The response letter was a masterpiece of legal strategy. It acknowledged the Christmas dinner incident factually, detailed our evidence, and noted the pattern of similar incidents documented by multiple witnesses. It also informed Vanessa's attorney that we had evidence of commercial exploitation and were considering our own legal options. Most importantly, it made clear we weren't making public accusations or seeking media attention. We were simply sharing factual information with family members who needed it. If Vanessa wanted to make the situation public, we were prepared to present our case in court. The response to our letter was immediate silence. No calls from family members, no texts, no social media activity from Vanessa. It was as if the entire Sterling family apparatus had gone dark, figuring out how to respond to a situation they couldn't control with their usual methods. But the silence was broken 3 days later by an unexpected development. I received a call from Jessica Chin, a producer at the network that had been considering Vanessa's reality show proposal. She'd somehow obtained information about recent events. "Miss Brooks, I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your sister's family content and the authenticity of the relationships she's been documenting. Before we move forward, we need to understand what actually happened during the filming session she submitted as part of her audition." I carefully stuck to facts, confirming the dinner was filmed for commercial purposes, that an incident occurred involving my infant son, and that the family relationships portrayed didn't accurately reflect our dynamic. I didn't volunteer inflammatory details, but I answered honestly. "Thank you for your honesty," Jessica said. "This information is very helpful as we evaluate our programming decisions." Networks have to be extremely careful about liability issues, especially when children are involved. 2 hours later, my phone exploded. Word had apparently gotten back to Vanessa that the network was conducting additional research, and she was in full panic mode. Patricia called, crying, begging me to contact the network. Robert sent multiple texts about family loyalty. But the most revealing response came from Vanessa herself, who showed up at our house unannounced that evening. David answered the door and found her on our porch, mascara streaks down her cheeks, shaking with rage. "You destroyed everything," she screamed as soon as she saw me. "Years of work, hundreds of thousands of followers, business relationships. I spent years building it, all gone because you couldn't just let things go." "I didn't destroy anything, Vanessa. I protected my child and shared factual information with people who needed it. If that destroyed your business, maybe your business was built on lies." It wasn't lies. It was content creation. It was storytelling. Everyone knows social media isn't completely literal. It's about creating aspirational content that people want to engage with. David stepped between us, his posture making it clear Vanessa needed to lower her voice. "You used our family as props for fictional content without our consent. And when our baby interfered with your production, you hit him. There's nothing aspirational about that. I barely touched him. And only because he was ruining months of work. Do you have any idea how hard it is to create authentic family content when people won't cooperate with the vision?" The admission was stunning. In her fury, Vanessa revealed she genuinely believed Lucas should have cooperated, and striking him was justified by the importance of her content. She wasn't apologetic about hurting him, she was angry he'd failed to perform. "Get off our property," David said quietly. "And don't come back. You can't just cut me out of the family. I'm Lucas's aunt." You have no rights to access a child you assaulted," David replied. "And if you come here again, I'll call the police." Vanessa's mask slipped completely. The polished influencer, the victim narrative, the claims of misunderstanding all fell away, revealing someone who genuinely believed she was entitled to use our family, and that our refusal to cooperate was a betrayal. She left screaming threats about lawsuits and family consequences, but her rage had strengthened our position. David had recorded the entire interaction, capturing her admission. Evidence that would be devastating if she pursued legal action. That night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Christmas dinner, complete certainty that we'd made the right choice. Vanessa's visit stripped away any remaining doubt about her character or her commitment to changing. She wasn't sorry for hurting Lucas. She was angry that hurting Lucas had consequences. The war we'd been fighting wasn't really about one incident. It was about the right of children to be protected from adults who would harm them for personal gain, and the obligation of other adults to speak up rather than protecting the abusers for the sake of family peace. We'd chosen protection over peace, truth over comfort, and our child's safety over our family's dysfunction. The consequences were painful, but they were also liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was free from the obligation to manage other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being and my child's safety. The battle was far from over, but we'd established clear boundaries and assembled the resources to defend them. Most importantly, we demonstrated to ourselves and our community that some things were worth fighting for, even against people we'd once loved and trusted. Lucas would grow up in a family that prioritized his safety over social harmony, that valued truth over convenience, and that understood the difference between love and enabling. That was worth any price. 6 months later, Lucas took his first steps in our backyard. David and I cheered from the patio. He wobbled between the garden bed and the fence, his face lit up with pure joy. No cameras documented the moment, no staged lighting, no audience beyond the two people who loved him most. It was authentic in a way Vanessa's manufactured content never could be. The legal threats had evaporated after Vanessa's recorded admission. Janet Morrison crafted a settlement agreement requiring privacy about family matters while ensuring we could share safety information with relatives who had children. Vanessa agreed to seek counseling, though I doubted she'd follow through. The reality show opportunity disappeared entirely after the network's background research. Jessica Chin later told me they'd received multiple corroborating accounts about Vanessa's history with children, and the legal liability was too significant. The entertainment industry, despite its reputation, drew hard lines around child safety. Patricia and Robert initially maintained their position, but as more relatives came forward with their own experiences, their narrative became unsustainable. Linda organized a family meeting where several witnesses shared their accounts, creating a comprehensive picture that even my parents couldn't dismiss. The meeting devastated Patricia, who genuinely seemed unaware of the extent of Vanessa's patterns. She'd spent years managing individual incidents, missing the larger pattern. Robert absorbed it silently, then retreated into his typical emotional withdrawal. Neither of my parents apologized directly, but their approach shifted from defending Vanessa to avoiding the topic entirely. They stopped pressuring me to reconcile and began interacting with Lucas during brief, supervised visits that felt stilted but safe. It wasn't the warm grandparent relationship I'd hoped for, but it was workable within our new boundaries. Vanessa herself had essentially disappeared from family dynamics. Her social media shifted away from family content toward lifestyle and travel posts that didn't require authentic relationships. She apparently moved to Los Angeles, though Linda reported her follower engagement had dropped significantly. The most surprising development was the response from extended family. Several cousins and aunts reached out, thanking me for speaking up about issues they'd witnessed but felt powerless to address. Sarah became a close ally, and my cousin Marcus was particularly grateful for the information. He'd been planning to ask Vanessa to babysit his toddler, unaware of her history. "You probably prevented something terrible from happening," he told me. "I can't thank you enough." The military community at Fort Henderson rallied around us, demonstrating the difference between chosen family and biological family. Colonel Martinez ensured David faced no professional consequences. Ryan and Maria became particularly close friends, and their children played well with Lucas. We'd begun creating the kind of authentic family traditions Vanessa manufactured for social media. "You know what I love about our gatherings?" Maria observed recently. "Nobody's performing. Nobody's managing anyone else's emotions. We're just enjoying each other's company without agenda or drama." Dr. Walsh continued monitoring Lucas's development and was pleased to note no lasting effects. At his 1-year checkup, she commented on his secure attachment and confident exploration. "Children are resilient when they have consistent, protective caregivers," she'd said. "Lucas clearly knows he's safe with you." That observation meant more to me than any family reconciliation could have. We'd prioritized Lucas's well-being, and he was thriving. David was promoted to lieutenant colonel, partly based on his leadership during what his superiors characterized as a complex family crisis. They specifically noted his integrity in handling a situation where many might have chosen easier paths that compromised child safety. The promotion validated our decision-making. The military valued the same principles we'd applied to our family situation. I started volunteering with a family advocacy program on base, helping other military spouses navigate difficult situations. Many had experienced similar conflicts between loyalty to birth families and protection of their children. I'd learned to recognize the signs of gaslighting and manipulation I'd missed in my own situation, and I could help other women trust their instincts. Linda became an unexpected source of ongoing support. She'd been considering speaking up for years. Watching you stand up for your baby gave me permission to finally tell the truth about things I've been keeping quiet about for decades, she told me. Linda also provided updates about Patricia and Robert. They'd begun attending counseling, trying to understand how they'd enabled harmful behavior. Your mother is starting to understand that protecting Vanessa from consequences didn't actually help anyone, including Vanessa. It's taken her this long to realize that love sometimes means allowing people to face the results of their choices. That insight had been crucial for my own healing. For years, I'd confused accommodation with love. Learning to distinguish between support and enabling changed how I approached all my relationships. Lucas's first birthday party was a celebration of authentic family bonds. We invited our Fort Henderson friends, Linda, and a few supportive cousins. The gathering was small but genuine, filled with people who truly cared about Lucas's well-being. David gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes, to Lucas, who taught us the difference between family that demands your silence and family that earns your trust. May he always know the difference between love that protects and love that enables. The contrast with previous family celebrations was stark. No performing, no managing emotions, no walking on eggshells. Lucas played freely, while adults had relaxed conversations. As I watched our son, I felt deep gratitude for the choice we'd made. He was growing up surrounded by adults who modeled healthy boundaries, authentic communication, and unwavering commitment to child protection. The most surprising gift came from an unexpected source, Eleanor's sister, Margaret, who was 93. She'd heard about our situation and requested a visit. When we met her, she shared stories about Eleanor. Eleanor always said that family isn't about blood connections or social obligations, Margaret told us. She said family is about people who show up for each other when it matters, who tell the truth even when it's difficult, and who protect those who can't protect themselves. Margaret also revealed that Eleanor had been concerned about Vanessa's behavior with children for years before her death, but had been dismissed by my parents. Eleanor would be proud of what you did. She always believed that protecting children was more important than maintaining comfortable lives. You honored her values even when your own parents wouldn't. The validation from Eleanor's sister felt like a blessing from beyond the grave. Now, watching Lucas navigate our backyard with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted his safety, I understood that we'd given him something invaluable. The security of knowing that the adults in his life would always prioritize his well-being over social convenience. David joined me on the patio as Lucas discovered a butterfly. Our son's delighted laughter filled the air as he tried to follow its flight, stumbling occasionally, but always getting back up. Any regrets? David asked quietly, though I knew his answer already. None, I replied, watching Lucas's pure joy. Look at him. He's fearless because he knows he's protected. He's curious because he's never been punished for being a normal child. He's confident because he's never been told that his needs don't matter. David nodded, understanding the deeper implications. He'll grow up knowing that love means protection, not accommodation. That family means safety, not obligation. That his worth isn't negotiable, even with people who share his DNA. The lessons we'd learned through crisis had become the foundation for the family culture we were building. Lucas would understand that healthy relationships required mutual respect, that boundaries were expressions of self-care, and that sometimes love meant saying no to people who demanded harmful compliance. As the sun set, and Lucas finally tired himself out chasing butterflies, I felt complete peace with our choices. We'd traded the familiar dysfunction of my birth family for the uncertain work of building authentic relationships, and the trade had been more than worth it. Lucas would never remember the Christmas dinner that changed everything. But he would grow up with the benefits of our decision to prioritize his safety over family harm. And he would know that his parents could be trusted to protect him, that his needs mattered, and that love never required accepting harm. The war that had begun with a slapped baby had ended with the victory that mattered most, a child who is safe, loved, and free to develop his own authentic self without performing for other people's emotional needs. In losing my birth family, I gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that I could build the kind of family that actually deserved the name.